This is panel 3, and the topic is civilian oversight. The first speaker is Charlie Beck, Chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. Chief Beck.
Chief Ramsey, thank you very much, and thank you to this panel for inviting me. And I also want to thank you for what you're doing and what you're going to go through. And I think that maybe that's key to this discussion, is that, you know, we are dealing with a national issue that has taken a very, very emotional turn. And as we sit here in this setting and try to come to rational responses, you know, it needs to recognize the emotionality of what's going on. You know, in Los Angeles, and I know in cities across the nation, there is much angst and even animosity towards policing, and some of it is based on fact, and some of it is based on emotion. And so the reason I'm saying this is because you like me are in a situation for which there is no win. You're going to come to good recommendations. This is a great panel. I know you're going to find the right things all over the country, and it's not going to be enough. And it isn't going to satisfy some of the emotion. And so you just have to be ready for that. And all of us do. And all of us. And the reason I say it is because we have to recognize that is a reality. And if we don't recognize the reality, then we can't deal with it. And so, you know, I appreciate what you're doing for the profession. You know, I'll try to keep this brief. I know you have many, many questions, but civilian oversight is the cornerstone of managing the Los Angeles Police Department. And it wasn't always like that. You know, even though we've had a civilian police commission technically in place for almost 100 years, the reality is that it didn't become a functioning policy body until the mid-'80s, mid-'90s. And until it was aided by the consent decree, which gave a mandate that the political will could not ignore, it really wasn't able to make significant change. And so you are going to try to look at structure, and you may look at Los Angeles structure and say, well, the police commission, you know, they approve all policy. All, you know, significant uses of force have to go through them for the final determination on whether or not they meet department policy. You know, they hire the chief. They can start the process to fire the chief. You know, they are appointed by the mayor, given 4-year terms, and you look at all that structure, and it's a good structure. It's a solid structure, but there has to be a mandate that goes with it, because, you know, a lot of the changes that the Los Angeles Police Department made that allow us to be better, not perfect, but better, are very expensive. I mean, I'll be honest with you. You know, having several hundred internal affairs investigators, having a complete separate division of almost 100 investigators that does use of force investigations, having a tracking system that can track 10,000 officers and try to predict behavior. All of that has to have the political will to be completed, because it's expensive. And in competing budgets, unless you have a roadmap to aid civilian oversight, it can be very difficult. And, you know, we had I think a perfect storm, so to speak, in that after post-Rodney King, the department hit bottom, morale and in a number of other ways, and then through the consent decree that came after Rampart, and having Bill Bratton chosen as chief, and having this mandate for change, and having some very, very talented people, including Connie, and one of your members, people like Ray Fisher, Jerry Chaliff. I mean, these are icons in criminal justice, you know, and defense attorneys, federal judges, having them be members of the police commission and help steer the department, immensely powerful. And so I'll stop because I know you have questions, and I'll ramble on forever if I don't control myself here. But the real strength of all this comes in the diversity of these partnerships. And I've said this for years. If the police chief says something, everybody goes, well, that's the police chief. You know, he wants the department to look good. He wants more resources. He wants us to all think we're safe. That's what police chiefs say. But if the police chief says it, and then a civil rights attorney like Connie says it, and then somebody like Ray Fisher or Jerry Chaliff says it, people pay attention. Because it's this diversity of ideas that focus on the same goal that makes the message powerful. That's what makes people believe what you say. And this panel has that. And you should use that, because that's the power of the voice. It's not, you know, all of us have a point of view depending on where we sit, and people recognize that. But when they hear it from people with many, many points of view, it becomes very powerful.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from Brian Buchner, President of the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement.
Thank you. On behalf of the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, thank you for the opportunity to address this task force. It's time to stop thinking and talking about civilian oversight in simple terms. It's a process, and like policing, it's complex. There are more than 200 civilian oversight entities across the United States, and no two are exactly alike. There are civilian review boards, monitors, auditors, inspectors general, among other models. Oversight is not an advocate for the community or for the police. This impartiality allows us to bring stakeholders together to work collaboratively and proactively to improve policing and make it more responsive to the community. Civilian oversight alone is not sufficient to gain legitimacy. Without it, however, it's difficult, if not impossible, for the police to maintain the public's trust. So this afternoon, I'd like to put forth 5 recommendations for increasing the impact and effectiveness of civilian oversight in improving public trust and enhancing public safety. They are as follows. First, fund oversight initiatives. The COPS office should promote civilian oversight and show its support by funding it, just as they do local law enforcement, with resources for training for oversight practitioners, as well as for the development of best practices and community engagement and outreach. At NACOL's 20th annual conference, COPS Office Director Ron Davis spoke about the important role of civilian oversight in community policing initiatives and improving public trust. Effective oversight leads to more effective policing. An investment in oversight is an investment in the police. The COPS Office should actively promote and support civilian oversight, and not just in the aftermath of a critical incident, but as a part of its regular efforts to advance community policing. Second, consent decrees. The Department of Justice should include in every consent decree and negotiated settlement agreement a provision to create civilian oversight where it does not exist or strengthen it where it does. Further, the Department of Justice should require a process for sustained community engagement in every consent decree. Civilian oversight has been featured in many consent decrees, but not all. Placing civilian oversight in a consent decree or negotiated settlement agreement allows for the work and the progress of oversight to be shaped and monitored by the federal courts with input from the local law enforcement agency and the public. It also helps to ensure that these oversight agencies have the proper resources and support in the short term to achieve compliance with the settlement agreement, and in the long term to achieve sustainable reform. And when the consent decree concludes and court supervision ends, oversight provides an ongoing mechanism for public accountability. Third, expertise. The Department of Justice should include civilian oversight experts in all of its pattern or practice investigations, even in those jurisdictions where oversight does not currently exist. Similarly, the COPS office should involve civilian oversight in all of its collaborative reform initiatives. Civilian oversight practitioners are from diverse backgrounds and include lawyers, investigators, researchers, former law enforcement officers, and community volunteers. As the practice of citizen oversight has evolved, those providing oversight services have developed a sophisticated understanding of policing, the law, and of the community's values and needs. They are uniquely positioned for objectiveness and strive to achieve the right balance between over-identification with the police and over-identification with the community. Fourth, research. The Department of Justice, through its research arm, the National Institute of Justice, should expand its research agenda to be more comprehensive and include civilian oversight. The NIJ recently announced its research priorities in policing for fiscal year 2015, which includes such topics as police use of force, body-worn cameras, and procedural justice, among others. And while proposals related to research and civilian oversight might fit into some of these topical areas, the NIJ did not explicitly advance them in any of them. The NIJ should specifically invite research into civilian oversight and its impact on, in relationship to, policing in one or more of these areas. Fifth, and finally, effectiveness. The National Institute of Justice must fund a study of civilian oversight to measure the effectiveness of various approaches to oversight. The lack of research into the effectiveness of different civilian oversight models and practices limits our understanding of what works and what doesn't in oversight, as well as how to improve its effectiveness. Effective oversight leads to more effective policing, and it's time that research catches up to practice. Citizen review is now found in cities and counties large and small, and in every region across the nation. It's time that the NIJ support a study that enhances our understanding of oversight and the critical role it plays in supporting effective policing. So thank you for the opportunity to provide input into this important process. Yours is an important mission, and you are all to be commended for your commitment to this process. NACOL, with its vast network of oversight practitioners and community stakeholders, is ready to work together to advance stronger relationships between the police and the communities they serve. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And next we will hear from Darius Charney, Senior Staff Attorney, Center for Constitutional Rights.
I don't know if this is working. I don't know if okay, it
It's
is
on.
working. Thank you. Good afternoon, and I want to thank the task force for inviting me to testify today at this panel on civilian oversight. I think that this meeting today comes at a really important time involving an important debate that we're having in this country around police accountability and racial justice. It is my belief and the belief of my organization, the Center for Constitutional Rights, that the goal of an effective civilian oversight system must be to maximize the transparency, accountability, and legitimacy of law enforcement agencies to the communities that they police. With this goal in mind, I offered 6 recommendations in my written testimony for how to improve civilian oversight in the United States. But for my oral remarks today, I would like to focus on 3 of them. I believe these are the 3 that typically do not get as much attention when we discuss civilian oversight in forums like this, but I think that they are very important nonetheless. The first is one that actually Chief Beck touched on a little bit, which is civilian governance of police departments. And by that, I'm describing structures such as the Police Commission in Los Angeles, where you have a board or commission of civilians that sets the policies for the law enforcement agency, functioning essentially as a board of directors would for a corporation or a school board would for a Department of Education. This model, we believe, has 2 very important advantages when it comes to policing in a democratic society. Those are, first, it allows for the public to have direct access to the policy-making body of the police department, which is very important when we consider that historically, law enforcement agencies are amongst the most closed and non-transparent governmental institutions in our country. The second advantage is that by having a board of civilians from a diversity of backgrounds, you allow for a diversity of perspectives into the policymaking process, rather than simply placing all policymaking authority in the hands of one person, a police commissioner. Obviously, there are limitations to this model which must be addressed. Specifically, again, as the other two panelists mentioned, it's a question of resources. Most police commissions and other civilian governing boards are made up of people who are, this is not their full-time job, this is something that they're doing as a part-time thing, and unless and until they are given the means and the tools to actually closely monitor the implementations of the policies they set, it is very difficult for police commissions to have any real influence over the day-to-day behavior of police officers on the street. Therefore, CCR recommends that the Department of Justice conduct a research study of jurisdictions that have civilian governing boards, and compare them to similar jurisdictions that are run in the more traditional way with a police commissioner, to determine if, in fact, one, there is a noticeable difference in the quality of community police relations in those jurisdictions that do have civilian governance, and two, which aspects of civilian governance models are most likely to bring about a successful governance model. The second model of civilian oversight I want to discuss briefly is the right of private citizens to record police-civilian interactions. There's obviously been a lot of talk in the media recently and will be discussed by this task force, police body cameras. But I think it's also important to examine the right of private citizens to monitor police behavior in this way. I think everybody knows that some of the most infamous and egregious incidents of police abuse over the past 20 years in this nation would not have come to the public's attention if it were not for recordings made by private citizens. Moreover, the Department of Justice and at least 2 federal appeals courts in this country have recognized the right of civilians to record police-civilian interactions in public is a fundamental constitutional right that must be protected. Unfortunately, however, through our work at CCR, we have seen that law enforcement agencies around the country continue to violate this fundamental right all too frequently. Therefore, we recommend that the Department of Justice issue guidance or regulations to state and local law enforcement agencies receiving federal funding, requiring them to adopt policies and procedures that protect the rights of civilians to record police activity in public, and specify that agencies which fail to do so will risk losing their federal funding. Finally, I want to touch briefly again on the aspect of court monitorships, which was touched on by Mr. Buchner, but I want to focus specifically on the right and the ability of communities that are impacted by the unlawful police practices that are at issue having direct input into the development of the reforms under the court orders or consent decrees, which both the Department of Justice as well as private civil rights plaintiffs have brought over the past couple decades. There are not very many examples of this, but there are 3 that I mentioned in my written testimony which I think can really be models for how to do this. The first was one that was done right here in Cincinnati, Ohio, about 12 years ago. The collaborative agreement that was reached through the litigation brought by private plaintiffs against the Cincinnati Police Department. I think it's fair to say, and not an exaggeration, to say that it really transformed this police department. But that agreement could not have come about if it were not for a reform process that explicitly obtained, through a very robust process, input from 8 different stakeholder groups in the city around police reform. The second example is in Seattle, Washington, where the Department of Justice has recently entered a consent decree under which a community police council was created, and they have the opportunity to review and comment about all reforms that are developed through the consent decree process. And the last example is my organization's own work on the Floyd versus City of New York case in New York, where the court order setting forth the joint remedial process will specifically require that the court monitor obtain the input of impacted communities into the development of reforms to the New York Police Department's stop and frisk practices. So those three reforms that I have summarized here briefly today, I think are a good place to start when we talk about improving civilian oversight in this country. And I thank you again for the opportunity to address you today.
Well, thank you, and thank all of you for your testimony. I'm going to turn now to our task force members for questions, beginning with Connie Rice, followed by Sue Rohr.
Thank you, Chief. Sorry, Chief Beck, but I'm going to make you expand on a couple of things. Thank you for your testimony. Can you describe the Community Safety Partnership Police and why they offer a set of solutions to this group?
In my written testimony, I've expanded on that a little bit, and I know that the task force will be able to see a little bit more about it there. And before I describe it, I have to say that these programs are an evolution. And if a police agency takes them on before it is ready, before it has evolved to the place where its workforce is ready to accept them, they will not work. Right? It is just as the police commission is. It is all in the way that the organization has been prepared to accept it. So, Community Safety Partnership is a group of police officers who were selected purposely for their emotional intelligence, for their ability to work with community, from hundreds and hundreds of applicants, and were put into our housing developments, the toughest places in Los Angeles, with the specific mission of building community. They were told by me and by everybody that all the way down the command food chain that they were not there to make arrests, although they might make arrests, and they have made arrests, and they have made significant arrests, but they were there to help the community to grow and function. They were there to do things like make sure kids get to school, to make sure neighbor disputes don't turn into violence, to ensure that the preschool programs work, to do all the things that are the glue that holds a community together. They created sports teams, which is a natural thing for police officers to do. They created after-school programs. We do lunch programs. We do a whole range of things, and it does a couple of things. It builds community, and it builds trust in the police, and that's what we're here to talk about. There are literally thousands of ways to build trust in law enforcement, and when people in my experience, and I have worked in South Los Angeles for almost 40 years now, in my experience, people that have the most likely interaction with the police, people that live in high crime neighborhoods that see a lot of police because we deploy by crime, and almost everybody does, those are the folks that want to know their police officers the most. They want to know who is policing them. They want to know that they will be there tomorrow. They want to know that they were there last week. They want to know their name. They want them to be part of the community. And so that's what Community Safety Partnership is. These are 45 cops that have been selected to work in the toughest places in Los Angeles for a period of at least 5 years. And we're 3 years into it. Jordan Downs, which is one of the most violent housing developments historically in the city of Los Angeles, went 3 years without a homicide. 3 years. When I was a young police officer in that same neighborhood, we would have 3 in a weekend. And so it is, and again, this is dissimilar partnerships. The Advancement Project with Ms. Rice, our housing authority, HACLA, they were the ones that funded some of this for me. Advancement Project does the analysis and a lot of the support. And this collaboration has made a huge difference in that community. But it's more than even just that community, because trust spreads. If you can build trust in the toughest place in your city, then that spreads throughout the city.
Thank you. Sue Rohr, followed by Jose Lopez.
I think this may have been answered somewhat by a couple of you, but I want to dive maybe just a little deeper. What we mostly hear, at least in the media, about civilian oversight is talking about accountability for individual acts of individual officers. And I'd like to know, particularly Mr. Buchner, some models or some strategies that you've seen that take us the next step and look at the system that created that behavior. It's sort of an argument between the bad apple versus the barrel that turned the good apple bad. And I'd like to know if NACOL in particular has a recommended strategy to not over-focus on an individual, and to the other two panel members, you may have some ideas as well.
Thank you. That's a great question. That's will be the focus of our symposium next week, which I know that you had a role in shaping, so thank you for that. I think what we're seeing in civilian oversight is that the field has evolved from its roots in the civil rights movement, where it was very focused on the individual actions of an officer, either related to a use of force or potential misconduct. And it's moved to a point where we're working collaboratively with the law enforcement agency that we oversee and the community to identify larger and more systemic issues and work together to come up with solutions. And I think that is where oversight across the country is having some of its greatest impact, is in looking at bigger systems. And there are a number of models, I think, that do that effectively. I think Los Angeles, the city, and the county has a history too, both with the work of Merrick Bobb and Mike Giannacco, and now Max Huntsman as the Inspector General. I think the Inspector General's office for the city of LA, I think, is another good model. I think you're seeing the Inspector General in the city of New York. He just issued his first report and is looking at bigger systemic issues. And I think the strategy really is to develop a relationship with the law enforcement agency so that the agency brings information to you, or you identify information or potential issues and bring it to them, and then you sort of work together to figure out how to address the larger problem.
If I could just address that a little bit. The Los Angeles model for the police commission is that they are the policy body for the Los Angeles Police Department. So I heard in your prior panel discussion talk about shooting at moving vehicles or shooting at vehicles. 10 years ago, when the Los Angeles Police Department changed its policy and restricted the use of deadly force as it relates to deadly vehicles, that policy gets vetted in public at the police commission and approved by the police commission. We may develop and suggest a policy, or it may come down from them that they suggested to us, but they are the final approval. So they are, when you ask about policies that create problems, if you have a civilian oversight that is the policy body, then they can adjust that. A recent example, body-worn video, body-worn cameras, the policy for their use is approved in public by the police commission with public comment. And so the police commission, in this particular case, with me and my staff, did multiple public meetings to get input, put up a website on which people could post comments, went all over the country looking at other agencies' policies, and then vet them in public and have the civilian body be the approval authority, not the chief of police, not the commissioner. So not only do you get a transparent process, but you get a true civilian oversight process. And so our police commission deals with some specific uses of force, but the vast majority of their work is in the policy realm.
How are those commissioners selected?
The mayor selects them. A mayor selects them. They are appointed for 4-year terms. It is the entire city of Los Angeles, every city department from animal regulation to Department of Water and Power has a commission. That's part of the governance system in the city of Los Angeles. Many times, the way that it will work is that an individual may start at one of the smaller departments' commissions, and the police department's commission, followed by the fire department's commission, are the most high profile and the entities that people are most drawn to. It's a lot of work, and the mayors have to pick people that are able to do considerable work. There are weekly meetings. Prior to the weekly meetings, all the commissioners are given at least what I would estimate is 2 days worth of reading to do, between the policies that are going to be voted on before them, and then the use of force cases, which there may be 2 or 3 a week that they review. They get a complete presentation in closed session on the use of force, use of force incidents. They make a determination. That determination is written up, and that determination, along with the investigation, is posted online so the public can review it after it's completed.
Thank you.
And if I could just add one other thing on the original question about oversight bodies that look at patterns and policies. I think New York and LA definitely are good examples. I would also suggest New Orleans, that you look at the Office of Independent Police Monitor there. But I think one of the really useful things that these bodies, whether it's an inspector general or an auditor or a monitor, is they can actually provide a forum for community members to voice their concerns. And then if they're hearing, similar concerns from a lot of people, that I think can inform, maybe we should look at this policy or that policy because this is something that keeps coming up again and again. And the same with looking, at studying the data on civilian complaints. If there are certain types of complaints that are becoming more frequent, I think that can inform what policies to look at.
And just to further describe the model, our Inspector General works for the Police Commission. Our Inspector General has a staff of about 60 people, all investigators that can look into any aspect of the Los Angeles Police Department. They have complete, unfettered access to everything we do. And so if issues come up, if issues go public, if issues rise to the surface, and the Police Commission has the authority and actually the mandate to work through the Inspector General to look at those issues.
Thank you all. Jose Lopez, followed by Tracy Mears.
Thank you. A couple of quick questions. Mr. Charney, you referenced the Los Angeles Commission as a model for department governance in your testimony. But I just have a question about Mr. Beck's comment regarding how the commissioners are appointed. And so you said all of the appointees are or decisions are made by the mayor in terms of who to appoint. So a two-part question. One for Mr. Beck: how have the people of Los Angeles responded to the fact that the mayor gets to appoint all 5 seats? And Mr. Charney, maybe after, can you talk to us about why that may or may not be problematic?
Well, the mayor appoints them, but every one of them has to be approved by the city council. 15 city council members all represent about 250,000 people within the city of Los Angeles. Every one of the commissioners has to be approved through the council process. And then every decision they make is subject to council review. The council, if the police commission makes a policy determination that the city council is at odds with, the council can take it up, have open public discussion about it, and then send it back to the police commission for further review. The mayor doesn't have that authority. The mayor has to work or does work through the police commission. So there is oversight to it. You're always going to have an appointing authority, especially for these kind of positions. We've had very progressive mayors, which has been really very, very helpful over the last decade, and they have picked very, very good commissioners, people that this panel would respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of what Chief Beck said addresses some of the concerns I would raise. I mean, I think obviously an obvious concern with any kind of political appointment is nepotism. You also, one of the things I said was important about this model, or the benefit I see of it, is a diversity of perspectives, that it's not just going to be all law enforcement professionals, or all of one kind of, profession represented. So if this is all appointed people, I guess there is a danger of the mayor just appointing his or her friends or people that he or she agrees with 100% ideologically, which sometimes can be a good thing if, the mayor is more concerned about police accountability, but if the mayor is not concerned about police accountability, then there might be a problem. But I think there are other ways to think through, and this is something maybe if research is done, on this model, other ways to think about how you would select the memberships of these governing boards.
Great. Thank you for explaining the council's function, Mr. Beck. That was very helpful. The second question, bringing us back to the community safety partnership. And I'm just wondering, when we're talking about that model, is there a process where the department is engaging the NYCHA residents in evaluating the entire partnership, but also the individual 45 officers who are subject to police their complex?
We have a contract with actually with the Advancement Project to do a review and of the efficacy of the public safety partnership, or community safety partnership. That's part of the grant that we got from the Housing Authority to do this. That's very important to us. This is a program that was featured recently. It's actually been in New York Times Magazine. It resulted in the captain that runs the program going to the State of the Union speech as a guest of Mrs. Obama. We have what's called the Watts Gang Task Force, which meets every Monday, which is a group of residents from the housing developments and the general community. The council person from that area, the police captain from that area, usually one of the police captain's bosses, one of our bureau chiefs will be there, residents from all the housing developments, and it is an open forum on policing and other issues within the housing developments. And oftentimes the conduct or the quality of our employees is a huge topic of discussion there. When you have such a deep knowledge of who polices you, you also get very strong opinions. I'll use this as an example. When during the Dorner incident, when Los Angeles police officers were being hunted by Christopher Dorner, the folks in the Watts Gang Task Force became aware that their captain, Captain Tingarides, was one of the people that was on Dorner's list, had been mentioned in Dorner's manifesto, and likely targeted by Dorner. And in fact, in the end, he was targeted by Dorner. The folks from the housing development asked us if they could go protect their captain. And that's how strong they felt about him. That's how strong the relationship was. It was what you would normally think of as a street gang wanted to go protect the police captain. Now, I told him I would handle it. But it makes a huge statement about how relationships can be built in places where you would never expect them.
Tracy Mears, followed by Roberto Villasenor.
Good afternoon. Thanks for your testimony. It's the third incredibly informative panel of the day. I have two questions. One question about funding for Chief Beck and Mr. Buchner, and one question just for Chief Beck. So let me ask the funding question first. Chief Beck, you said something really interesting about how agencies have to be ready to do this work, and you also talked about how expensive it is. And I'm wondering if you could say something about the role or value of the consent decree process in creating an atmosphere so that the city is willing to pay. So I assume that the city is paying for this, so it's got to be tax dollars, and sort of how you create a community impetus for people being able to foot this bill. So that's the funding question for you. Funding question for you, Mr. Buchner, is you said NIJ should, designate some kind of funding for this kind of research. And I'm wondering if you could say something about why you feel it's important for NIJ to be the funding agency, as opposed to foundations or some other entity. It seems to me as long as the research gets done, it shouldn't matter who does it unless you have a particular reason for that. And my last question for you, well, let's just do it.
Yeah, you're gonna lose me.
Okay.
So, Los Angeles Police Department was under a federal consent decree for 12 years. We were drug kicking and screaming into that consent decree. And we were we were the first large agency to fall under a consent decree. We had a tough judge, Judge Fees, who oversaw the consent decree, had a very tough police commission that helped him to do that. And we were able to use it eventually, once it became, once the organization accepted it, and actually, full credit to Bill Bratton for recognizing the potential, accepted it as a means to make needed changes. We were able to get funding for which we would have never been able to get. Every city of Los Angeles included, has these tremendous pushes and pulls for its resources. And it's almost like a forced savings account. Unless you have something that forces you to do these things, the cause of the moment is likely to take the funding. It's not popular funding for a mayor to say, I'm going to double the size of internal affairs. It's not popular funding for the mayor to say that, we're going to increase police use of force investigations so that every one of them is done on the same, with the same intensity and effort as a murder investigation. These are things that have to be mandated in some way, and whether it's a negotiated settlement, which I think that's a great way to do it too, or a full consent decree, or some other mechanism that this council would recommend to our administration. There has to be a way to make sure that this is more than just a one-day thing. It's more than just people talking about it. Getting these things done is the hardest part. Finishing something, that's the hardest part of anything that any of us do. And to get these things finished, they got to be funded.
So the answer to your question is that it should include more than just the National Institute of Justice, and private foundations would be a great source of funding for studies of civilian oversight. The reason that I limited my recommendation to the NIJ was because this task force was created under the President's executive authority. We focused our recommendations here today on what the federal government could specifically do to increase the impact and effectiveness of civilian oversight.
Okay. One more quick question for you, Chief Beck. In your written testimony, you mentioned that the Community Safety Partnership is comprised of 45 officers. I think you also said that in your oral testimony. And I'm wondering why just 45 officers? Is that related to the funding issue, or why not do more people?
Well, we are actually expanding it. Part of it is funding. So that's 45 officers for about 15,000 people. Really intensive. I could not police the whole city that way. I'd need a police department the size of Chicago's. No, New York's actually. Yeah. So that's the reality of it. Is that we wanted to, first of all, we want to try this in a place that needed it the most. We want and when we first did in-car video, I put them in South Los Angeles. When I got offered some funding to help me do this, and I fund most of it, but we get some small additional funding to give the police officers what we call an upgrade, which is a very small pay bump and an insignia on their uniform that represents that they're the hierarchy in the organization. I put it in South Los Angeles because that's where the crisis of confidence is. That's where that's where this program will not only be tested but be the most effective.
Okay, Roberto Villasenor, followed by Sean Smoot.
My original question was somewhat answered, but now it's led to some other ones, and it builds on the experience that we've had today with previous panels. And it can be to any of you on the panel here, but earlier in panels, Ms. Rice was trying to bring up the issue of the top agencies to emulate in the country. Who comes to mind? And obviously, her thoughts were LA. After listening to some of the programs, I clearly understand why she feels that way. But other discussions that we had up here is that how do we get our messages across? Because there's agencies throughout this country that have success stories, but you don't hear about them. And we were talking about up here about maybe partnering with academia, because academia documents what goes on, and there could be a synergistic effect. And you bring in the issue of civilian oversight and what occurs there. So all these thoughts are bouncing around in my head right now, and I guess what I'm trying to coalesce together is how do we get the message out about these things and how the interaction between civilian oversight and civilian involvement and community policing needs to be part of our mantra, and how do we get that spread on a nationwide basis? And I'll throw that out to any of you that want to tackle that.
Well, I think you're sitting there. You know, I mean, I think you have an amazing opportunity as the President's task force. I mean, this is unprecedented. You are our voice. You know, you are, that's why I made the lovely flight late last night, because all of you are our voice. You know, this is a critical moment in policing, and if the voice of the folks, and I looked who's on your docket, and I have huge respect for my colleagues that you selected. You have to be the voice, and so I would ask you the same question. Now, there are a number of other ways though. Whenever we do a program like Community Safety Partnership or the body-worn cameras, we include a funding to analyze and to comment on the process, to a review. We got good funding from NIJ to do the body camera review. But I think that's important. I mean, all of us have got to look at this. Cops, and Taz, you're a cop. All of us are get things done people. But sometimes we forget that you got to be able to tell the story too. And so you have to figure out a way to tell the story. And so you got to include that in your programs. And whether it's partnering with somebody like Connie to tell a story, or all of you in your roles right now. I mean, that's what has to get done. Because, when you asked about what are the most affected departments, Chuck, you sit on major city chiefs. You hear this all the time. You know what departments work and what don't. Taz, you're at the same meetings I am. We all, and it isn't that one department is so good, it's that collaboratively there are a lot of good things out there. And hey, LA's got a long way to go, and I'm thrilled that people think we've come a long way, but there's a lot of good programs out there, and telling the story and doing the analysis, real analysis, so we have some actual, information-based ways to pick programs. That's key. That's what we got to do. That's what you got to do. That's what Major City Chiefs has got to do. That's what IACP has got to do. We have organizations, and sometimes they get lost in other things. Well, this is what we should be doing now.
Thank you.
Sean Smoot, followed by Brian Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panel members. Your testimony today has been very, very informative and is much appreciated. Chief Beck, I'm a big fan of the Watts Bears. I wish that your community safety partnership program could be replicated in every city across the United States. It's a tremendous example for us. And I also know it costs a lot of money, but we hear a lot about what's important, what the important values of cities are, but then when we look at their budgets, we see maybe those values aren't reflected. And I commend you and your city for your program. For the panel, I know it won't come as a tremendous shock to you to know that rank and file officers around the country kind of view civilian oversight, or the term civilian oversight, as a threat to their due process rights, their maybe constitutional rights, or their employment rights. And so what I would ask of the panel, and any of you or all of you could maybe answer this, what would you say, and what, I'm going to give you the opportunity to say it, to the rank and file officers across the country who feel like, you know, they already answer to civilians in the form of an elected government that they work for. They answer to their department administration and command. They are answerable to state prosecutors. They're answerable to the United States Department of Justice, to their Civil Service Commission, or their Police and Fire Board. What can you do to allay their concerns? What can you say to them to allay their concerns that their rights can be protected, and that this isn't just yet another layer of the multiple layers that they're already placed under?
I think that's a very true recognition of the often tenuous relationship between police labor and civilian oversight around the country. I wish it weren't the case, and I think a vision for the future would involve a partnership between police labor and civilian oversight, which would come from the recognition that oversight is that impartial body that is there not as an advocate for the community or for the police, but as the entity that is examining the standards, making sure the standards are being followed in that individual agency, that they reflect the community's values, and that those standards are reflective of national standards or the prevailing standards in the profession, and that the members, the rank and file officers, the members of police labor can come to civilian oversight when they are experiencing issues which we know they experience in their own agencies. And that because the role of oversight is to improve policing, to improve police departments, that the oversight is an important partner in helping to reform systems that are broken and they're not serving the police labor any better than they are the community. And so I think when the recognition comes that civilian oversight plays that important role in protecting the rights of the officers just as they are there to protect the rights of the community, I think you can maybe start to have a more constructive dialogue. I think there's going to be some tension there, naturally, because the role of oversight is to hold individual officers and entire agencies accountable. But I think the recognition of the potential partnership between those groups will help, I think, move the conversation forward.
Got something to add to that?
I do. I think you have to have a balance. And in the balance, the officers' rights and the profession's needs can be representative. And so the way the balance has been put into the LA system is this, is that on discipline is the sole purview of the chief of police. So while the police commission does make policy and can rule individual actions of a police officer out of policy, the discipline attached to that, what the remedy for that is under the authority of the chief of police. So part of my job is to make sure that my 4 decades of policing experience and the rules learned by my father and the experience that is related to me by my kids doing the exact same job is reflected in the decisions I make relative to the police discipline. And so it's a balance. And if you have the right balance, then everybody can be represented in this. Now, as in any system, representation does not always equal being pleased with the result. But at least it gives everybody an opportunity. They know, officers know, that it's not just the police commission's decision, that the chief is also involved. And that when the decisions are made, the chief's at the table, and when the decision on what will be done is made, it is the chief's.
Connie, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, Chief, that's exactly right, and I'm jumping out of my skin here because I'm thinking of the one argument that I've made for making cops go along with our little experiment here with Community Safety Partnership, and that's when I tell cops, take a look at the longevity and safety stats for cops, I just point blank tell them, you're gonna go home to your family if you do this. And it's true, I'm not lying. The safety stats for Community Safety Partnership Police, especially when the communities got your back and they're looking out for you because you've looked out for their kids and their mothers. It was like when the when the Blood Bounty Hunters were going to protect Captain Tingarides from Dorner, and I didn't believe it. I told Chief Green I thought he was hallucinating because black gangsters don't protect LAPD captains. Well, I went and found the Blood Bounty Hunters. I said, guys, what's up? And they said, don't get it twisted, Connie. We still hate the pigs. We still hate cops. But these cops, they take care of our families. They create leagues, they give our grandparents medical tests, they really take care of our families, and the Community Safety Partnership Police, we don't want nothing to happen to them. We want them safe. So that's what was going on there. And they do, once you can connect the dots to police safety, I have found that it's a much easier sell.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Our final, go ahead. I'm
So I was
sorry.
going to add one more quick comment, just as a follow-up, just to show you that it can happen. The Los Angeles Police Protective League is sponsoring a training workshop in Los Angeles on police oversight investigations because of the relationship between the PPL and the IG's office, specifically because of the intentional work on building that relationship and building trust. So it can happen.
Thank you very much. Our final member to ask a question this afternoon is Brian Stevenson.
My question's really just, it's technical, but I'm really intrigued by this and really encouraged by the presentations by all of you. I'm trying to think about how we take this to scale, and what I'd be interested in knowing, first as a technical matter, Chief, is the funding for the police commission. Does the city make a general budget to the police department, and out of your budget is the funding for the commission, or are they two separate budgets? That's the first question. And then the second question is there some ratio any of you can give us, some kind of, and I'm not looking for a precise form, but just something that would help me think about the appropriate budget relationship between effective civilian review boards and police departments, because I think that's going to be a threshold question we encounter when we start talking to communities that haven't dealt with these kinds of issues. And if there's something out there you can point me to, that would be helpful as well.
So the answer to your first question is that it's part of my budget, but our budget process works like this. My staff prepares the budget in conjunction with the mayor's office. It goes back to me, then it goes through the police commission, who has to approve it, and then it goes to the city council, who has hearings on it. So everybody is involved, but so it isn't like I could just say, well, hey, you know, I'm not getting along too good with the police commission, so I'm just going to defund them. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. You know, that's not the way the system works. And then as to the, you know, as to the funding ratio, you know, the police commission, our police commission has a couple of other ancillary duties, oversight of various business and professions. So they have a staff of about total 250 people probably, and so that's out of an organization of 13,000, so something like that.
The ratio is typically skewed in favor of the police departments. There's only one place that actually has a standard that's set by ordinance, and that's San Francisco, the Office of Citizen Complaints. And their staffing in the Office of Citizen Complaints is tied directly to the staffing levels of the police department. That office was created in 1982, and it largely replaced the internal affairs function of the San Francisco Police Department. They're the primary investigative entity for public complaints or allegations of misconduct against San Francisco police officers.
Well, thank you all very much. This has been a very informative panel. Please help me recognize them for their testimony.